First of all, really enjoyed the film. I really enjoyed all your work in the past as well.
Seconds there. I'm so sorry.
No, you could really enjoyed the film. Really
Oh,
enjoyed all your work in the past.
great. I'm glad we got that part. Awesome. Thank you.
But yeah, no. So obviously, this film has a bigger budget and more modern technology than Lloyd Kaufman had making the original Toxic Avenger. But I think
Sure.
you do a great job of balancing that with like the scrappy B movie sensibility of trauma. So how do you go about kind of balancing, modern audience expectations with this spirit of trauma?
I really I chased the trauma spirit primarily and kind of like I figured that if we treated this like a comedy that it would find a modern audience. It maybe it's not going to be for everybody, but for the people it's for, it'll land with them. But I really was thinking that like if we're gonna do this at all, it should have the texture of the original. And that's sort of the story, but it's also like, when I was talking to the costume designer and the production design and the cinematographer, everything was sort of like, let's imagine that our resources were limited. Let's imagine this is a little more homemade. And we kind of break those rules here and there, but it really was kind of like approaching it as if we had a tripod and not a crane. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
and that kind of thing. That's why having a performer in a suit have Toxie be, like a practical makeup effect as opposed to a CGI character. We couldn't have afforded that anyway. But even if we could have, I would have preferred to do a person in a suit because I feel like that's what could make it feel A, kind of special and unique today in this landscape, and B, um, connected to the original. Like I don't think people that are fans of, I could be wrong, but I don't think people that are fans of the original Toxie and just the Trauma universe in general are that they want something that's super slick, super polished. So that's probably just not the appetite, was my guess anyway.
yeah, for sure. And also in line with that spirit of trauma, this is a deeply silly film, but beneath that, there's this very heartfelt, emotional through line. And why do you think that this was so important to this film?
That's exactly what my takeaway was when I saw the movie when I was a kid. I was like, this shit is totally ridiculous. It's totally absurd. And in that way, I found it very funny, but it's also very sweet. I mean, I, I know they're ripping people's arms off and they're crushing kids' heads on a bike and like, yes, but there's a sweetness in the way that Toxie moves through the world. And there's also, to me, a charming kind of sweetness in the way that it feels like the movie was made. Like not what's on screen, but the way that it's put together. It feels like a bunch of buddies who were like, let's start a band, or let's put a play on in the basement. And I found that charming when I was a kid. I found it kind of inspiring because I saw it at an age when it was sort of like, oh, you can actually get a video camera in your home. Like that's a thing that, like, somebody's parents got a video camera and we were like, look at this amazing thing. We can make our own movies right now and watch them on the same day. It was incredible. And so a movie like that, where that seems to be what they did, they just went out and made a movie on their own terms, was very inspiring. And that's what I pitched to Legendary. I didn't have a story. I didn't even really have a character, but I was like that fun, that silliness, that sweetness, it needs to be part of it. It shouldn't take itself too seriously. I think that's what people would expect when they come to see a new version of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's no stretch to say that trauma is very anti-establishment. And I think your film's commentary on big pharma is a very natural extension of that. Why do you think that these themes were perfect to explore through the Toxic IP?
I mean, it wasn't specifically big pharma as much as just big business, and it was just Toxie was always an underdog. There was always this thing about like, he came to be because of pollution and everything, and that was in there. And I like that it wasn't nuanced. I like that it was just like this shit sucks, boo. And so that was sort of how we approached it too. And it was just a matter of wanting to give Winston Toxie the most formidable adversary, and so I thought, to go up against. And even though we've got like gangs of criminals and other monsters and stuff like that, it's really this big system that like takes all the money for itself, and people like Winston are kind of left out to dry, and that seemed like it gave him the most um uphill battle to have to fight. So it was really about just like what's the best villain that I could make for him that feels consistent with the original movie in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so going into kind of like more your career, I don't feel at home in this world anymore is more of like a slow burn that leads to like this explosive finale
Yeah.
versus Toxic Avenger, you're pretty much ramping it up to 11 almost immediately. So,
Yeah.
as both like a writer and director, what's the difference for you in like these two approaches?
It's mainly like I get very what's the term? Like my attention span is very contracted, and it's sort of like once I've done this thing that like if the first one, which was many years ago, but like I kind of thought like, all right, that's probably going to be my only opportunity to do a movie. So if I'm only going to get to do one movie in my life, I'm going to want to do this crime movie that's kind of slow and quiet and kind of funny and kind of romantic. And then it turned out that I was able to do another movie, and I kind of just wanted to do something that was very far afield from that and much more cartoonish. Like I really thought of it as like a live action uh, cartoon movie, and a much more broad comedy where it's not muted and sort of um, under the surface, it's very much sort of in your face and sloppy and ridiculous. So it was just about wanting to kind of go in the opposite direction of where I had gone before.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of your films and your films as a writer as well, um, blend elements of like violence with dark comedy. And so why do you think that these things are such a interesting tonal fit for one another?
I mean, I think it's just like whatever can, for me, it's like provoking a reaction from the audience, and the only metric I have for that is my own reaction to movies. And when I'm being led down uh to like classic jump scare stuff when you're being led down one direction and then it's suddenly the balloon is popped because somebody gets hit in the head with a hammer out of nowhere and you're like, oh shit, like I love that kind of sitting up straight in your seat reaction. And I never really thought about it this way, but now that I'm sort of like, there's all these questions about Toxie and everything like that, I think there's something to do with me having seen that movie when I was 12, where like that was sort of like the way that the comedy was presented. And then we kind of started adapting that kind of or adopting that kind of comedy into the movies that we were making, where like somebody's arm gets ripped off and they get hit with their own arm or something like that, where like the gore is played for a chuckle. And it's not that I was like, one day I've got to remake The Toxic Avenger. That never crossed my mind. But that sensibility got baked in very early on, and I think without even thinking about it or even being aware of it, I was probably cycling back to that when I would write stuff, in later life.
Yeah, absolutely. And something about the Toxic Avenger that I find is very interesting is that it's being released in theaters unrated, and that's not something that used to be possible. But then, like films like Terrifier came along, which also released by the same distributor as you guys, and it's
Yeah.
kind of opened the door for this to happen. Why do you think that this is so exciting for genre films in particular?
Um, I think it's because there's something about like the idea of this limited window of availability where like in when there's movies everywhere, you can watch anything you want on your phone, you've got everything on your TV, it's sort of everything is instantly accessible and everybody is kind of used to that. And as a result, to me, fewer and fewer things feel special, and sort of like it, at least that's my perspective. And I'm much older, and so I grew up in a time where there was fewer movies, and like going to the theater was like a big thing. And so I think when you, just by nature of putting the word unrated or not rated or something on a poster, kind of regardless of what the content is, it sort of makes an event out of it. And it's sort of like, oh shit, I got to get to the theater to see this. And it sort of, it adds a little layer of specialness that I think is exciting to people. It's kind of exciting to me, and so I think that's what it is. It just sort of like it makes it feel like a little bit of a mini event in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And to talk about, like the acting, I think Peter Dinklage does a great performance here. We get to see like kind of all the sides we've seen from him, the charm, the humor, the action hero. Why do you think he was perfect for this role?
It was it was really because of the human part of the character at the beginning of the movie where we had a very short window to kind of like lure people in and get people on his side, which was something that like Mark Torgl did so fucking well in the first one. It's like once you see him like strutting through um the health club, you're kind of like, oh man, I want to give this guy a hug. You want to like you were instantly on board with this guy. And then everything that came after, you were kind of on board for that. And I was kind of like, I want that kind of a thing where even though we've only got maybe 20 minutes with this dude, that people will very quickly get on his side and want the best for him so that when he does mutate and you kind of lose sight of him a little bit, like you're still very much on his team.
Yeah, absolutely. And in many of the early Trauma films, Lloyd Kaufman makes his cameo appearance, and in
Yeah.
this one, you get to make your cameo appearance. So, how fun was it, kind of like getting to continue this tradition?
Well, it was fun. The reason why I put myself in there was so that like you could know you would have seen this character one or two times kind of in the background. He's not an important character, but it's kind of like you've seen him around and you know he's kind of a loudmouth so that at the end Lloyd can show up and yell at him. And that was the whole design was kind of like do the cameo so that the Lloyd cameo could be like get off my lawn. You know, that kind of a vibe, like in good humor to kind of like have like a little thing of him kind of like settling me down, which I thought would be a funny way to kind of honor him and sort of give him the proper respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, you got to work with him. How exciting was it for you to work with him?
It was I mean, it was really exciting, but also he puts you at ease instantly. And so like the excitement of like, woo, it's Lloyd. Is very quickly replaced by like, oh, he's just easy to talk to and kind of easy to hang out with, and he's got this enthusiasm and sort of positive vibe. And so he came out to the set and was just kind of like was really just kind of like, let me look at the sets and let me look at the props and I want to say, oh, look at this makeup. This makeup is so cool. Look how cool that is. And and that was a lot of fun to see. So I mean, like on one hand, I'm aware that he's this institution in sort of the movie making, the independent movie making landscape. Um, and on the other hand, he's kind of just got this like super fan vibe that's just kind of like fun to be around.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, obviously, you're in addition to being the director of the new Toxic Avenger, you're a big Trauma fan yourself. So if either, as a filmmaker or as a fan, is there another Trauma property that you'd like to see get like the remake slash reboot treatment?
I think Nukem would be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I mean, like because we we sort of allude to it in small ways in the movie. Like that was I have no idea like what's if there's any plans for that or not, but it was just like if there are, then like we could sort of put a little runway out and you know the idea of doing these types of like ridiculous mutant bloodbath stories in a high school setting I think would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know you're about to start work on your next movie. I don't know how much you're allowed to say about it, but if there's anything you're allowed to say about it, I'd love to hear about that.
I would say it's a little bit I was talking before about just doing the opposite. It's back to in terms of tone and style more like the first movie. It's much smaller. It's a very small independent movie. It's a road movie. It's a comedy. And yeah, we start shooting in about a month. So, but it'll be more similar in terms of vibe to Don't Feel at Home. There's no monsters.